What's up, y'all? What's good? Welcome to the What Up Doe Show. It's your boy Dame D, and we are back with another one. I'm gonna wait before I start talking about today's topic for a few people to jump in and chime in before I start up. Let me make sure my volume and you guys can hear me. So give me 1 second. So, so what's going on, out there? Hopefully everybody having a good day today. Hopefully everybody having a good Hump Day Wednesday. Okay, just want to make sure you guys can hear me. Okay, just want to make sure you guys can hear me. Okay, I have volume. There we go. So yeah, we're gonna be coming in and talking about the youth of today. Let me make sure I get my topic right. Let me go here and look. Hold on. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna be talking about the about parenting and the youth of today and how has parenting changed since we grew up as youngsters. So I want to talk about that for a second. I'm gonna wait for a few people to tune in and chime in, and then I'm gonna go ahead and flow with it. I'm not gonna be long today. Just want to just talk about today's parenting, and how has it changed since we grew up. You know what I mean? Because we did a show last night, just talking about the youth of today and the gun violence, and how since the start of 4th of July, it's been a lot of violence amongst in the African American community, I should say, with a lot of gun violence. And I just want to talk about, the parenting and the difference between, how we were raised and how we're raising our children today. Because I have grown, all my kids are pretty much grown, and I started all over now. I have a 2-year old that, that I have to, you know, uh get him right to be able to maneuver and navigate through this world. You know what I mean? So let's just talk about that for a second. The comment section is open. I definitely need for you guys to communicate and comment through that. If you are not subscribed to the channel, make sure that you go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It helps the channel grow. But yeah, let's talk about parenting, and today's today's parents. You know what I mean? It seems like to me the parents of today, especially with the young women, they try to, more like be friends with their kids versus being and let me turn this volume down a little bit, versus trying to, actually be a parent. You know what I mean? It seems like they're trying to compete more than anything, especially once these kids get to a certain age. It's almost like, to me, like these mothers are trying to compete with with the daughters, and that leads to a lot of problems in their relationship. But I mainly want to talk about the parenting with these young boys out here, because that's the problem that's gotten out of control, of recently, with our young men. you know um it's not enough jobs out here to go around. We have to be able to create and make stuff, and put these young boys in some type of summer programs to keep them busy and occupied, because if not, they're going to trouble is going to find them. You know what I mean? And that's how it normally works and how it normally goes. So we as adults, we have to have to continue to try to find different avenues and ways to keep our children busy so they can stay out of these streets, because you definitely don't want the streets raising your kids. And that's what's going on with a lot of these youth of today. The streets are raising these kids, and they're just gotten out of control. So we have to get a hand and a grip on this. And it starts, like we talked about last night. It starts at home first. It starts with the first teachers, and that's the parenting. You know what I mean? And a lot of these kids are coming from single parent households. You know what I mean? So you know um and I usually try to, and you can't blame it all on the one parent. It takes two parents to raise a productive child. And I'm not saying that one parent can't do it, because I was raised by a single mother. And I think she did a pretty decent job trying to raise four of us. And don't get me wrong, it was a difficult task, it was a difficult job, but she was able to do it, without us getting into, too much trouble, or, get being in trouble with the law, I should say, and that's the difference between, today's parenting and the parenting of old school. Our parents tried to, keep us occupied as much as she could, and we kept ourselves occupied as much as we could too. Today's children, and today's youth, it's just so much technology to the point where you don't even see kids outside playing anymore. You know what I mean? All the kids are inside on their tablets, on their phone. I think that's who majority of the times who's raising these kids is, are these tablets and these laptops and this phone and the televisions. You know what I mean? So it's leaving these kids with like no sense of, I'm not going to say direction, but it's like they don't know what to do besides, just be on this tablet and being on this phone and watching TV. We have to create, things and avenues for these kids to, to be able to be in. Like I said, through my childhood, I've always, was athletic and stayed into, programs that kept me busy, throughout the summer and throughout the year. I think that's what's missing, from a lot of the youth of today. They rely on this social media to entertain them, and these phones to keep them preoccupied, throughout the day. You know, so let's just talk about that. I need for you guys to comment, let me know, what do you think the difference is between from when you were raised and growing up to how your parents raised you to how you're raising your children. You know what I mean? Do you think the culture has changed on how it is raising kids, because like I said, a lot of this music that these children of today are listening to is influencing them, in a negative type of way. We talked about that last night on the show. Me personally, I think it's time for us to, to get our children, and a person in Joseph, he hit on that last night. You won't be able to remove the music from the children, but you can kind of control what they listen to, and you have to start young at an early age, um, because I don't think I want my son growing up, being influenced by this type of music. We have to get back um to the music that, had us, I'm not gonna say, because we listen, because growing up, I'm gonna keep it real. Growing up, we had vulgar music. We listened to NWA, but before that, we had music that, uplifted, our spirits, uplifted the community, the people. We were talking, it was more like of a respect thing, that we had for the music and the music had for the people. Now, they're just pumping nothing but, this kill, shoot them up bullshit, in our children's minds and their heads, and they're going out trying to, live this shit, and that's what most of these youths in Chicago, are reliving. They're trying to live like the people that they portray and see on television. You know what I mean? We got to get our kids up out of that mindset, because that's why, we're dealing with the situations that we've been dealing with, shit for the last 30, 40 decades, real talk, because of the music, how it influences, the youth in negative ways, sometimes and sometimes in a positive way, and in the positive music that we used to have years ago, they slowly but surely removed that, from the things that we listen to, so now everything that we listen to, it's all about, shooting a nigga, killing a motherfucker, riding and sliding and all that. This is the type of stuff that your kids is listening to. You know what I mean? When they listening to, people like Lil Durk, King Vine, and all that type stuff. You know what I mean? So we have to get that type of mindset, out of this next group of young men and women that's growing up. You know what I mean? So my challenge is to the next, upcoming rappers and, singers or whatever, try to put out something, positive. I know these labels are paying these children to be able to put out this destructive music, but every once in a while, put something out positive, that'll uplift, that'll try to change the mindset of the youth of today. You know what I mean? So yeah, I want you guys to comment. Let me know what you think about this topic. I definitely want you guys to key in and give me your thoughts on that. I'm freestyling, I'm flowing. I don't have a script or anything. I'm just flowing, seeing who all want to conversate about this conversation. And like last night, I'm gonna start with me. I'm looking for any young men or women, in the Detroit to Toledo, Maumee area, who knows about editing, who knows a little bit about Sony Vegas software editing. I need help with that. You know what I mean? So, and that's what it's about. It's all about trying to give, young people a chance. Giving them a way out. And that's what. Most of us as adults have failed. You know what I mean? We're letting the streets get a hold to these young men and women, and they're raising them. So yeah, I want to be able to open up my doors, open up, the things that I have. I need like some young man or woman, a young boy or girl, who's interested in editing and podcasting or just speaking or talking. You know what I mean? I definitely can help you get into help you get established into what you want to do. Far as that, and have you learn like the things that I know. I can teach you what I know. Like I said, I definitely need help in learning my editing. That's going to help me take what I'm doing to a different level. So I'm working on that. And I definitely need help on that. And I know a lot of the youth of today are pretty good with with this technology. So I definitely. If anyone is out there, like I said, in Detroit to Toledo, Maumee area, get with your boy. I definitely have some work for you. You know what I mean? And we'll be able to, get something going. You know what I mean? So it's all about networking, and just trying to build relationships with people. That's what I do over here. I try to build relationships with people, and just try to uplift myself and then uplift those that's around me. That's what it's about. So we're talking about how has parenting changed from when we grew up today. The most thing I think what has changed is, and I said this earlier, I think most parents of today try to be cool with their kids. They try to be more like friends than a parent. And that's the difference. You have to draw a line between being cool with your kids, and just being a real parent. You know what I mean? Because there's nothing wrong with trying to relate and trying to be cool with your kids, but at the same time, will they respect you? Because that's something I kind of learned. When and I and I just I realized that just from just watching over the years of certain people how they parent or certain people how they talk to their kids, and how that comes out. But I think with the parents who try to be more cool with their kids, the kids do not respect them. As much as the parents who's not trying to be friends or cool with them. You know what I mean? Because when you when you tell them something that they don't want to hear, or you tell them something right and they don't agree with you, they're looking at you different, like, like, hey man, you normally cool, or you normally let me do that. So we have to get away with that. I think that's the difference between, today's parenting and the old school parent. You know what I mean? Yep. So I just want to talk about that, because like I said, it's been getting crazy, throughout the country with these young folks, with these YNs, and that's something that, we gotta get in front of, this name calling, and this labeling, you know what I mean? But yeah, like I said, let me know what you guys think about today's parenting and the youth of today. You know, so what do you think about? Do you think it's a big difference between how you grew up and how your children are growing up? Because the goal is always to try to be a better parent to your children than what your parents was. You know what I mean? And then you always try to set a great example, and a great a great example for your kids to go after. So you have to watch what you say, you have to watch what you do, because like I said, I'm starting all over as a parent. So I'm learning this new generation of kids, because like I said, I have almost a 3-year-old. He's going to be growing up, so I have to, watch what I say, because he's repeating and doing everything that he sees me do. You know what I mean? So, what, even with the arguing and the disagreement that you may have with your significant other, you have to watch what you say and do around your kids because they are sponges, at an age like that. You know what I mean? So it sets a mark on their character and who they're going to be, for the rest of their lives. So you have to start young. You have to start with them young, and put some type of discipline, and then one thing that we talked about last night that Joseph knows, he brought up, a lot of what these youth of today are missing is church. And I'm not a big religion man. I'm not really big on that, but I was brought up in the church. You know what I mean? My entire life, and I think that's what kept me playing level. On the and just kept me from not really running these streets and just not getting into too much trouble because, you know, um, you understand what religion, is you have consequences. And I think the kids of today, that's what they're lacking, the empathy of consequences. They think they can do whatever the fuck they want to do and there's no consequences. So that's why you see, a lot of turmoil, a lot of mischief, and just a lot of out control that you see coming from like Chicago, even Philadelphia. We talked about that yesterday in the show. The violence that we've been seeing, amongst our youth since the start of the 4th of July. You know what I mean? You had a young woman who had a record release party in Chicago, and she had the party in the suburban area, where it wasn't where she thought it wasn't going to be a bunch of niggas or YNs at, but they end up still finding out what this young woman through the record release party had shot that up. A few people got hit. I don't know if anybody died in that situation, but it's just like you can't do anything, without someone trying to put what someone trying to do someone harm, and these are the things that we didn't have to go through when we grew up. When we went to parties, we really didn't have to worry about a party or a club or any of that being shot up. You know what I mean? You now the youth of today, these motherfuckers shooting up funerals and stuff like that. So you have to worry about things like that. So it all starts with the parenting. You know what I mean? And it all starts at home. That's why you see so much of this stuff all on TV, because these kids have gotten out of control. There's no home training. There's no consequences. And really what really was going on is there's no men, in these single households. You know what I mean? So they're lacking both parents, because you really do need both parents. You know what I mean? Because when you do a study on children growing up with both parents, it shows, and 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 I can contest to that. Growing up with both parents will definitely, give your child, a better chance at life at growing up. Escaping, the certainties that a lot of these single household children have to go through. You know what I mean? So, like I said, it starts at home. You know, um, we have to definitely be, even if you're not in the same household as your children, you still have to be involved. Just like you're in the same household as your child. You know what I mean? So I just want to come on and just tap in for a little bit and just talk about that, parenting, how has it changed from when we grew up to now? It's definitely has changed a lot, but like I said, I want to start working with, some of the youth and, allowing, people to come in to, learn about the, the podcasting industry, get a little information about that, just give them the knowledge that I know and be able to help them out, because like I said, it's still a lot of stuff that, that I don't know, that I'm not familiar with, that, that I'm going to need help with. You know what I mean? Like I said, I still need help with editing and and just trying to bring in my graphics and my special effects, and add that to my shows. That's what I'm missing. So and I know it's a lot of young folks out here that know a lot about that. You know what I mean? So I'm opening up my doors and I'm trying to bring someone in that'll, to be able to help me out. And that's what each adult need to do. Is take someone, up under their wing and help them out. Give them a chance to, get away from, from these streets, you know what I mean? Show them something positive, give them something positive, and just let them see that it's more than, just these streets, and just let them know that, we do, that we do care, we do love you, we don't want to see you out there, on these streets, so yeah, like I said, my doors is definitely open. I'm looking for someone who definitely who knows how to do editing, you know what I mean? Because like I said, I have a lot of things that I'm still learning, how to work with my equipment and everything. So I need help, so my doors is open, and it all starts with just trying to be, you know, um, it all starts with an adult trying to bring someone one in who may need a little help to get started. You know what I mean? That you may be taking someone off the streets who's in between thinking about being on the streets, or in between of trying to do something great with they said with their lives. So I think each adult should open up their door, open up their hearts for one of these youth, or it could be someone in your family, open that door up for them, try to, just bring them in, and and help them out and whatever they want to do. So like I said, I'm looking for someone who knows how to edit. I got a little bit of equipment that I need help with, like far as just with my editing, so I'll be able to bring someone in and show them the ropes of what I do, and they'll be able to help me out and what I need, with my editing and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's how it starts, because I didn't have my father in my life, but I had uncles, and it's all about having mentors and stuff like that too. I had uncles. I had two great uncles that was in my life, and I looked to them for structure and what a man should be, because both of my uncles that I look at like father figures, they both were married, both great men, so it starts with, and this is for the youth, let me switch my camera. Okay, so yeah, this is for the youth out there. You find someone to attach yourself to, that's doing something positive, and that's what I did. I took my Uncle Keith, and then I took my Uncle Bucky. That was two positive men in my family. Like I said, my dad was not in my life like how he should have been. He was around, but he wasn't in my life. And he was not um I'm not gonna say a positive male figure in my life, but I took my two uncles that were, what I mean, and I attached myself to those guys, and I watched them, I watched how they talked to their kids, which were my cousins, and how they treated their wives, and things like that, and how they raised their family, and I tried to take the good from them and implement that in my life, like with my Uncle Keith. He raised six kids, him and his wife, a great man. I've actually got a little documentary that I'm getting ready to put together for him, but he was the father of a whole neighborhood. He opened up his doors to any young man that wanted to box, wanted to train. That was a good man. So what I mean is, you have to attach yourself to good men, to men that you I'm not going to say idolize, but that you look up to. And that's what you have to do. As a young person, if you don't have anybody that's positive, in your life, you have to find uncles, that may be positive. And like I said, I took two of my uncles, and they took me up under their wing and showed me what it is to be a man, and I think that's what the youth of today are missing. They're missing, real men. I had real men in my life that, like I said, took me up under my wing. My Uncle Keith, bless his soul, he's not here with us today, but he was a great man. He took the whole, Brightmoor community up under his wing, and anyone who wanted to come, and box and learn, he took everybody. He took me up under his wing at a young age. I grew up playing football, basketball, baseball, and I boxed. You know what I mean? You know, um, and like I said, he was just a tremendous role model in my life. There's not a day that I don't go by that I don't think about this guy. This man. I looked at him like a father figure. So he's definitely one of the inspirations in my life. You know, and then my other uncle, my uncle Buck, he's one of the main inspirations in my life. Great man, a God fearing man. And we talked about, and Joseph talked about that last night too. That's what a lot of these youths of today are missing. They're missing religion, and don't get me wrong, I'm not really big on religion, but what religion does, um it keeps you on an even playing field, you know what I mean? Because without, the fear of God, you know what I mean? Everyone would just this whole world would just be in total chaos. So, you know, I'm just gonna I'm not gonna too much talk about religion, but that's something that we all need to, you know, embrace and have in our life. And that's what I think the youth of today are missing too, religion and God, that's why you seeing all this chaos throughout the country, because, a lot of people are missing, the word of God, the word of Christ. We have to get back to that, and a lot of this stuff is coming from, not having big mamas no more, because like I said, I had a grandmother who was really religious, who kept the whole family into church. You know what I mean? So, and bless her soul, she's not here with us today, but, those were one of the things that I think that, kept me on the straight and narrow, kept the uncles that I was talking about, my Uncle Bucky on the straight and narrow, because they followed, the footsteps of their mother, which is my grandmother, because she was a big on religion, you know what I mean? And and she lived a great life, you know, um, so yeah, that's one of the things that, that we have to keep involved and, keep these kids, off these streets, put a little religion in them, put a little God in them, because that's what they're missing. I'm not saying we have to go to church 5, 7 days a week, but, um, put some type of church in your life. You know what I mean? Even if you don't even go to church, still sit down, read your scripture, get on your knees at night and pray. You know what I mean? I'm not all that big, but I still do believe, I still do pray, and prayer works. You know what I mean? So we all should implement that into our lives. And I think that this would make this country a better place. If everybody, put a little bit of, religion in them in their heart. Because we all know right from wrong, and that's really what it is at the end of the day, right from wrong, so that's what I think our youth of today are missing. They're missing true men, true leadership, true father figures, and like I said, you have to be able to attach yourself to someone that you look up to and that you respect, you know what I mean, and follow their lead and follow their role, and you should be all right, you know what I mean? Because like I said, I had two great uncles that I was able to look at, and get, aspirations, and be able to kind of model myself after them. You know what I mean? But you just take the good that you see from them and implement that into your life, and that's what I did. You know what I mean? So yeah, I just want to come in and tap in with you guys for a second. It's been what? It's been a half an hour, so a few people have been chiming in, jumping out. You know, I don't think I have anything else to add. I may come back in, but oh yeah, you know what? Since I'm here, we can talk about the floods too. I want to give my condolences to all the people who lost family members, who lost their lives in that flood. It's a horrible situation. It's still going on. They're going to be having more bad weather coming out this upcoming week from what the weather channel was saying. So, say a prayer, for those people out there that are going through a horrible situation. A lot of people has lost their lives, their homes, so we have to be thankful, for the things that we got, so like I said, you have to just say a prayer for those people and be thankful for, for what you got, because those people are out there hurting. Homes are being washed away. Lives have been taken from this flood, and you still got, hundreds of people that's out there missing. You know what I mean? So yeah, I want to just make a few comments on that. You know, um, that's been dear, on my heart, watching that, people, houses float by, you know, um, and we blessed to be in the Midwest, for the people, those in the Midwest, we don't have to really worry about floods and things like that, but, it's definitely a rough situation for those people out there. My heart goes out to, the people who have lost loved ones and, things like that, in the house. Houses can be replaced, but lives cannot. You know what I mean? So, like I said, I want to give my condolences to the people that have lost their lives and lost loved ones. So yeah, like I said the other day when I was talking about that, if you are interested in trying to help those victims out, definitely make sure that you get in contact with someone's reputable, before you donate your money or your services, because you have a lot of people out there that's scamming on people in situations like that. You know what I mean? That's scamming on, people that's trying to help people out in hard situations. Which is a fucked up situation. But yeah, let's get back to the youth. I think what the youth of today is missing, like I said, they're missing mentors, people like I talked about, like my uncles. I had two great uncles that, that I looked up to, and I saw and I took the good that I saw in them and implemented that in my life. Just tried to, go on, with that. You know what I mean? So sometimes you have to look. If you don't have no one there, like I said, if you coming from a single household and you don't have a dad or a father, I'm quite sure you have uncles or some type of male father figure in your life that you can somewhat attach yourself to and try to take the good that you see from them, implement that into your life, because I think that's what's wrong with these young men of today. They don't have real men, to be able to look up to and follow after. A lot of these men today are trying to be like these motherfuckers that they see on TV, trying to portray, you know, um, you know, uh, the movie stars, the rappers, and things like that. You have to just own up to who you are. Be who you are. You know what I mean? Try to be the best man that you can be. Don't go. Um, you don't have to try to be. You don't have to try to be like the Joneses. You know what I mean? Be yourself. So, but yeah, like I said, for the youth, and this mainly, I'm mainly talking to the youth, to the youngsters, to these young, to the YN, to the young men growing up. It's a better way out. You don't have to be out here on these streets thugging. That thugging shit, that's for dummies. You know what I mean? You want to educate yourself. You want to do something positive. You want your parents to be proud of you. All this bullshit that you see on these streets, that you see on this social media, it's all a facade, and it's a facade to get your ass locked up to be somewhere that you really don't want to be. You know what I mean? Because the real thugs and the real killers, they locked up. You know what I mean? And I don't think a lot of the you youths of today want that smoke. You know what I mean? So just be yourself. You know what I mean? You guys are coming from a world of technology. Use this technology to be able to better yourself, to be able to better your family, and just make a name for yourself. Even if you don't make a name for yourself, just be a great man, a God-fearing man, and just be, the best person that you can be. You know what I mean? All this shit that you see on these TVs with these rappers, that's not that. They're portraying a life that's not really real. You know what I mean? They're doing a job for your enemy. They're trying to keep these prison cells filled up, and that's what's really been going. That's what's really the deal with this gangster, with this drill rap music. It's portraying a false life. That these rappers are really not living. You know what I mean? Some of them do try to live that life, but the ones that do try to live that life, guess where they are? They're dead or either in jail. Most of them dead. You know what I mean? So you just got to just think about it. Just think about all the rappers that don't lost their lives within the last 20 years that was out here like on that thug, trying to be, on that thug shit. You know what I mean? That shit don't lead you nowhere but to jail or dead. I don't think no rapper has survived that thug bullshit. You know what I mean? So, you have to look to a different avenue, a different route. We already got enough rappers out here. We need we need more, men with educations, men that, electricians, shit like that, men with trades, and everybody don't have to go to college. College is not for everybody. We need to get back to getting our youth into trades. The men that the men that's out here with money, and that's what our stars need to start doing. The men who have money, they need to start investing back into the communities. Starting for trades. We need to start bringing these trades back. When I was going to school, we had trade schools. We had Votech. I even went to Votech. You know what I mean? And it was a good thing. I wish I would have. I'm not going to say I did, because I did take it serious. But we had automotive, we had like HVAC, all that different type of stuff. You know what I mean? So, and I don't know if they still have those, or in the inner cities. It's been 25, 30 years since I've been in high school. You know what I mean? But from what I'm hearing, most of the Votech schools, or educational schools, trade schools, I should say, they took all that stuff out of the inner city. So, that would be an awesome thing, you know, for for some of the stars, for some of the people that has means, that want to give back, to try to start giving back, or try to open up trade schools for these young boys and women to be able to do. You know what I mean? They have so much to be able to give, but it's just not a lot of opportunity out there. So we have to be able to provide opportunity, and that's what's going on. A lot of our people that's out here that's making money, they taking the money and they making the money, but they're not giving back, and that's what's going on, and that's what's been missing too. And I'm gonna definitely talk about that. Our people out here with means, who's making money, you know, um, who lived in these same communities. You have to be able to give back. And one good way of giving back is trying to open up some type of business where, we have trades for these young men and women to be able to go to, because everybody can't be a basketball player. Everybody can't be a football player. Everybody can't be a rapper. You know what I mean? So we have to give these kids more options. And that's what's really been going on, in the societies for the really pretty much for the last like 30, 40 years. There has not really been many options for these young men. You know what I mean? Mainly, and I'm not going to say there's not been opportunity for the young women too, but mainly it's been these boys who's been out here, finding themselves in the trouble with the law. So that's what we have to talk about. We have to, bring that into fruition. We have to be able to open up businesses where we can bring these young men and women in and teach them trades. You know what I mean? We need to open up some trade businesses or schools. You know what I mean? Bring that back. So let's try to get that back into the schools. If no one has gotten them, has talked about that. Let's start talking about that, bringing the trades back, for our young men and women. You know what I mean? Because I tell you what, our counterparts, they definitely, I see it every day, where I work at, the skilled tradesmen, the electricians, things like that. They definitely made sure that their kids had trades, to fall back on, or to actually go to, if they didn't want to finish school, or things like that. There were trade schools. So we have to definitely be big on that, get our youth involved, and, into that. Let's get away from wanting to be rappers. We got enough rappers out here, I think. I don't think we need any more rappers. We need more, lawyers, it's definitely lawyers. We need more policemen. They're always hiring. We need more African American to be out here protecting and serving our communities. You know what I mean? We have our counterparts that's out here in our communities that's terrorizing the communities. You know what I mean? So only thing that we can do to make a change about that is make a change. Let's put more thoughts and ideas in our kids' head to, for them to be officers. You know what I mean? Let's create police officers. Let's create lawyers. Let's create judges, so they can oversee our people in our communities. You know what I mean? That's what we're missing. So, and it goes back to it goes back to to our youth seeing a positive especially with the young boys, because most of the young women have their mothers that in their lives to be able to follow and see what it is to be a woman. It's mostly the young men that's lacking fatherhood. So we have to reach back and get back to what's greatness, and it's our youth, because without our youth growing up having some type of what's the word that I'm looking for? A desire to be great. They're gonna these streets is gonna teach them, how to be great. These prisons are gonna stay filled up. And that's the goal. Let's to keep these goddamn prisons empty. You know what I mean? Let's keep our kids out of these jails. Let's bring back these trades. And just get them involved. Because like what I'm doing, this is somewhat like a trade. I'm opening up my door. So I want to take someone who wants to learn you know, the ins and outs of this. Like I said, I need someone to teach me how to use this editing software that I've had for a while that, I just really haven't had the time to sit down and go through it. But, I'm learning, but I definitely would love for someone who knows it or who wants to know how to learn it. I'm definitely going to open up my doors for somebody, and that's what it's about. It's about one adult, taking one person and going from there. That's what it's all about. It's all about it's about showing these youth that someone do care, because a lot of them coming from single parent households, without dads in the house showing them how to be a man, and they have to go out here on these streets, and learn how to be a man. I'm still learning how to be I'm just gonna keep it real. I'm still learning the ins and outs on how it is to be a man, how to be a father, a good husband, a good brother, all that, you know what I mean? And I had to teach myself, you know what I mean? Everything that I've learned, I pretty much had to teach myself, so there was a lot of I bumped my head, a lot of times along the way, you know what I mean? You know, but that's what happens when you don't have real father figures or a father figure in your life. You're going to bump your head, and sometimes it's going to be in a negative way or in a bad way. But you have to learn from your mistakes, and go on. But like I said, that's what most of our boys are missing. They're missing real men, real leaders, real. Men to look up to, not no, they looking up to these rappers, and shit like that. You don't want your and it's always the saying too. This was a saying that stuck with me. If your son don't want to be like you when he grow up, that means something. I ain't gonna say you ain't shit, but if your son don't want to be like you when you grow up, it's a problem. Because like I said, I came from I had two great uncles, and I watched how my cousins, how they wanted to be like their dads. You know what I mean? So, those are it starts with at home. You know what I mean? And most of these boys are missing those father figures, in their life, and that's what it's about. Like I said, I watched how my cousins, how they wanted to be exactly, like their father, you know what I mean? And that's a great thing, your son wanting to be like you. That means you doing something great. You know what I mean? When your kid want to grow up and be like you. So, we just need more, like I said, more role models, more men that's men. Most of these men of today still want to be in their 20s and 30s, and ain't nothing wrong with being young, but at the same time, you have to accept that you're not in your 20s or 30s no more, and then you have to be able to lead the way for those that's behind you, like for your sons, your nephews, and cousins like that. You have to be an example for those. So that's all I'm saying. That's what the youth of today are missing. They're missing real men in their lives. That they can see every day how to be a man. And I think that's what most of us bumped our heads along the way, and the youth are today has been bumping their heads because they don't really have true leadership, true guidance. No one telling them, like, no, don't do it this way, son, or don't do it this way, young fella. Do it this way. I did it that way. That way you gonna learn hard. You gonna end up learning the hard way if you do it that way. So that's what's going on. We don't have men in the house today, um, keeping it real or showing these young men, how to do it the right way. You know what I mean? So we as men, we have to, you know, we have to be more of leaders, and show them the right way. You know what I mean? So like I said, I'm starting with me. I want to open up my doors, to any young man or woman who's interested in doing podcasting, who knows anything about editing, because I definitely need my help on editing. I want to implement that, into my shows. You know what I mean? Because that's what I'm missing. Right now I just been doing a lot of things freestyling along the way, without any editing. You know what I mean? And I definitely need to, you know, bring that up a little bit. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, the youth of today, um, it's a bright future for our youth. You know what I mean? The technology, is awesome. I wish, we had a lot of this technology when I was growing up. You know what I mean? Because I would be a lot further in life than what, a lot further in this than I would, if I grew up with a lot of this technology. I'm learning a lot of this shit on the fly. You know what I mean? And it's not easy. Doing a lot of this stuff on your own, and that's with anything. It's not hard. It's not easy doing stuff alone. So, you're always going to need help, and that's what's wrong with our youth of today. They're doing everything on their own and they need help. You know what I mean? They haven't had really any guidance, so that's why you get the violence, and that's why you get the shit that you see that's going on in the streets today, because they've been influenced by this music, and if people don't think it's the music, they're wrong. Music is the number one most influential thing on this planet. It influences me. It can put you in a mood that you may be in a bad mood. You can put some music on, it's gonna put you in a good mood. You can put some shit on that'll have you ready to ride. And that's what these youths are today. They listening to this drill music, and it's just putting them in a move, in a fucked up move. It's just putting them in a bad move, and they're going out here doing stupid things, listening to this music. You know what I mean? So we have to change the culture, and it's all about changing this culture. You know what I mean? So, and that's what it's about, and we definitely need to get back to talking about trades, getting our youth, these young men. We got to try to start putting that into their mindsets. Like I said, school, college may not be for everyone. But definitely, get some type of trade or some type of skill in your life. Because at the end of the day, you can never take a skill or a trade away from you. That's something that you're going to always have up under your belt. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think I pretty much don't hit on everything. Like I said, I want to. My doors is open. If anybody want to reach out to me about, editing, definitely get with me. My doors is open. I'm always here. For anything, you need me for anything, come to me, talk to me, and just for the anybody, if you guys have any ideas of things that you want me to talk about, put it in the comment section. I'm definitely open for, any topics that you guys want to do, and I definitely want to start doing more shows on, you know, talking about our youth and getting and just trying to get the mindset of our youth on a positive mindset. You know what I mean? And that's what they need to hear, more positive men. They need to see more positive men and women in their lives. You know what I mean? And it's for the girls too. You know what I mean? Our females, um, and that's another subject, so I'll get back and I'll talk about that on a later date. With our young women, the mindset of our women, definitely has to change. This I don't need a nigga for shit. you know um don't brush that shit off on your young women, because I have a son that's going to need a wife one day. So don't put that bullshit ass mind set into these young women heads, because they're going to need a young man, they're going to need a husband one day. So please stop feeding that bullshit into your young daughter's head, because Men are definitely needed. Fathers are needed. You know what I mean? That's why the society is the way it is now, because the mindset of most of our women thinking that they don't need a man in the household to be able to raise these kids, and they were wrong at that. It was a lie. It still was a lie, and it's been a proven lie, and what I mean by it's been a proven lie, just look at the jail cells, look at the households, look at what's been going on in our societies, and guarantee you most of these households, most of the young men that's locked up in these prisons come from single parent households. You know what I mean? So we have to get our young women out of that mindset, because there's no other race of women that's saying that about their men, talking about you never heard a white woman talking about I don't need a hunky for shit, or you've never heard a Chinese man saying I don't need him for shit. You never hear them say that. It's only our women that's saying that shit. You know what I mean? So excuse me, so we have to get our women out of that mindset, that they don't need men for shit, because y'all do. You know what I mean? Y'all need us for everything. You need us to be able to have kids. You need us to be able to raise our young men and women. You need us for everything, and we need y'all too. We are a couple. You know what I mean? Everyone's not perfect. We all make mistakes. We all do things that we've not proud of, but at the end of the day, we need each other. We're the only group and race of people that fight amongst each other. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying that other races or groups don't, fight, but it's only our group, and it's only our women that's saying that we don't need men in a household. Our men, we don't need niggas for shit. You know what I mean? I hate to say that, but those are the words that you hear our women saying. Those are the things that you see on social media. And these are the things that go into our children's mindset. You have young. There were studies that was done on young girls. You know, in school, in grade school, like fifth grade, like kindergarten. I'll say like first grade, but it was a study that was done on kids, and they were asking them about, husbands and stuff like that. And these little girls were saying, we don't need no husband. We can do it on our own, listening to what they heard their moms say. You know what I mean? So we have to get our young women out of that mindset. It starts with them young, women, try to do your best at, when you choosing this man, make sure that the man that you laying down and sleeping with is your husband and that you having kids with. We got to get out of that having kids out of wedlock and just having kids just because you got pregnant. You know what I mean? We got to I won't even go down that road, but yeah, we just got to get back to the mindset that we do need our men in the households, and once we get our women on that back on the mindset that we do need our men, and we got to and it may be too late for some of you old motherfuckers, for some of you old heads, but it's not too late for the new generation coming up. You know what I mean? So let's get their mindsets back on to being families. Young women should want to be married to young black men. They should want to be wives. Excuse me. And young men should want to be husbands and great fathers. You know what I mean? Just go back to your childhood when you was a kid. You know what I mean? I'm quite sure you looked at your family situation and you probably was like, I can't wait till I grow up. I'm not gonna be like this. I'm not gonna be like that. Let's get back to those mindsets where when we're kids and we were and we saw real fathers and mothers and families. We have to get back to family, being families. We're not families anymore. A family doesn't consist of a woman and kids. That's not a family. That's just a woman with kids. A family consists of a man and a woman and kids. That's what a family is. That's what a family is. So let's stop getting it twisted. A family is just not a woman who have kids. A family is a woman. A family is a woman and a man with kids. That's what a family is. So I'm not gonna hold you guys up long. It's been damn near an hour. Wow, time goes by fast. But I just want to talk about that. You know what I mean, for a little bit, and and put that on the mindsets of the people. And that's what we need to get back to. We need to get back to putting positive things in the mindsets of our youth. It may be over with for a lot of you adults. You already stuck into your mindset. Your mindset is what it is, but you're still not too old to learn, and to change your mindset. So that's what I'm on. I'm trying to set some positive vibes for some of the youth that may watch my show, or for the youth coming up, or even for some of you adults. Maybe I can change some of the mindsets, and you can reach out and be able to help a young man or a young boy, who may be going down a wrong path, and straighten them up and lead them down the right path. So I'm not gonna hold you guys up. It's been another one. It's your boy Dame D, and I am out. Peace.